Julian Barnes is one of the most successful serious novelists of a dazzling generation. Flaubert's Parrot alone has been translated into more than 30 languages. He has never lost the sense of a literary career as something that starts with craft and even hard graft before it turns into art. Julian, one of the first things I noticed in your ambiance was an extremely modern conceptual artwork, which I think was composed mainly of snail shells. So I thought, what's that doing here?
Indeed. It was cicada cases, actually. And it's the only sculpture I've ever made in 1977.
Oh, it was yours?
I made it, yes. And it's called London Literary Life. And I picked them up in Washington, D.C. And they're the pure, they have all the outline of the cicada, but the beast has flown through a sort of slit in the back. They come out of the ground, they climb up the tree, they attach themselves to the tree trunk, and then the actual insect flies away, and you have this pure cast of a medium brown coloured cicada. So I collected about 100 of them, and then I started sort of playing with them. And I made a little sculpture which was meant to be symbolic of London Literary Life, which I had just become a member, very junior member. And the idea was that it was it seemed like a sort of circular, slow ramp, making a progression towards the top. When you got to the top, it was like Masada. And the only thing to do was either throw yourself off or be sort of crushed to death by the others.
Or executed by the Romans when they finally occupied
yes,
the
yes. And there was a great pile of these cicadas on the top, and there was one just teetering at the top. And it was Melvin Bragg at the time. It's probably changed name now.
Top cicada.
Yeah, top cicada, exactly.
Well, now this is a natural link here. Now you're one of the top cicadas.
One of the top cicadas. It sounds like a very bad group, doesn't it?
Did you have a plan? Did you?
Good God, no. Funnily enough, though, I remember once talking to Melvin about it, and he said, you know, I think what you did was just about right, he said. I mean, you did sort of journalism, and then you sort of moved into novel writing, whereas I did television, and then I moved into novel writing. I think your way of planning it was better. And I have to say, I looked at him with complete disbelief, because, I mean, the idea of planning any sort of literary career, even planning from one novel to the next, just seems so sort of alien from what it feels like inside. You know, you get a bit of book reviewing, you then have slightly longer book reviews, your brain gets slightly better, you write a short story, you try to write a novel. And it's always seemed to me that what happens from one book to the next is just a sort of crocodile pit, and you might never ever get across it. So the idea of having some grand strategy seems to me barking mad.
Yeah, the whole thing is just about as unplanned as anything could
Yes.
be. It's organic, in other words.
Yes, and of course, once you've written half a dozen books or something like that, or once you have any sort of reputation, it looks as if everything has been logically tending to that conclusion. And there's a certain self-deception in your own attitude to it, and you almost begin to retell your story, and you think, oh yes, well of course I did that book, and then I did this book, and that made sense to do this book. But you forget the hazard and the false starts and the forking paths.
But still, you have your models. Even those early fidgety days, you have your heroes, don't you? I mean, I think one of
yes, you have your heroes, but I think your heroes can often work against you, because you think, what's the point of writing a novel after Madame Bovary has been written?
Flaubert is a big man for you.
Big man, yes. He's the top cicada of all time.
Top French cicada.
Top
cicada,
French cicada,
however you say
yes,
it.
Yes.
Well, how did
Cigale, they would say.
Cigale.
Yes, top Cigale.
Cigale supreme.
Mr. Grasshopper, number
Okay,
one.
Mr. Grand Cigale.
Yeah.
But how did he start off?
He started off, I guess I first read him as a result of, we had a very brilliant English master just down from Cambridge, who actually seemed to persuade us, unlike other English masters, that literature was something to do with life. And he made that great connection for us, for which I've always thanked him. And he gave us sort of hot shit reading list, which no one in their right mind would not have read by the end of the holidays, in the course of which there was this novel called Madame Bovary, and I thought, oh, that sounds like a sort of hot French novel. I was 15 or something like that. But there's some sex in that, I thought.
Well, there is at one stage.
Well, I read it, and I thought, gosh, this is the doesn't seem to be erotic to me. In my maturer years, I realise it is a deeply erotic
Throbbing
novel,
with it, yeah, yeah.
and that it's more powerful for being withheld and being glanced at times. But something about it clearly conveyed the word genius to me, and that was from then on.
You're reading in French at that stage?
I read it first in English, but I was also reading French at school, and then at university, and I ended up doing a sort of special paper on Flaubert. And once you read and half understand Madame Bovary and see what it's doing in the novel, and recognise it as the first modern novel, it doesn't leave you. There are certain geniuses who are geniuses when you're 18, and they stop being geniuses when you're 25, like Victor Hugo or someone like that. But the great ones stay forever.
But even Flaubert, compared with Madame Bovary, for example, just how good is Salammbô? There's such a thing as unevenness, isn't there?
Yeah, sure. There is. And he knew, I think, in his heart that Madame Bovary was always going to be his best book. I mean, there's unevenness, but there's also trying to do something different. After the great realistic novel of modern life, provincial life, startling shift to Carthage, and Punic Wars, with vast amounts of research involved. So one of the things that he also teaches you is, don't knit the same stuff twice if you can avoid it.
I think Olivia once said the important thing is always to come in through a different door.
Yes, yes, yes.
Anyway, French became a big thing for you.
Yes, I mean, I think that's my second civilization.
You could do this on French television, for example, and have.
I think I would need some sort of mild drugs and drink to do it. Yeah, it's not so relaxing, I must say. But yes, I've done French television programs.
Even Flaubert didn't escape criticism. I think Henry James at one stage said that Flaubert paid too close attention to language or something. And I think even Proust somewhere says it. Criticism is something an artist had to live with. Flaubert was extremely annoyed at something Sainte-Beuve said about Salammbô, as I remember.
Yes, I don't think he ever learnt not to read his reviews, and he was very thin-skinned, and he took it, he took it personally, as every writer does.
I agree with that, although not many writers will admit it.
I mean, I'm now in the sort of slightly surreal state of being a writer who doesn't read his reviews anymore, and really doesn't. But the sense of self-diminishment as a human being when you used to read them and feel these violent emotions about the guy who'd actually written the stuff, which you felt was not just some sort of sensible, level-headed disapproval of what your work, but a sort of deep gut loathing of you and everything that you stood for, or something like that. When you find yourself thinking about things like that, then it's time to stop. But I mean, there was a guy called Barbey d'Aurevilly who I have never been able to read because he always dismissed Flaubert's novels. Every one that came out, he wrote a scathing review of it. So in revenge, I will not read this guy's work. That's a sort of slight madness of a sort of reader's devotion to a writer, I guess. So you multiply that by about 5 when you're receiving criticism yourself as a writer.
One of the things that came out of Flaubert's great career was that in many ways he left the 19th century novel behind in the way that the 19th century novel had connected with a big audience. And it was a founder of what we now think of as modernism, in the sense that a modern writer it's very important to establish a reputation among your fellow writers, among the critical establishment and so on, and you can actually have a career without having a big connection with the public. And it still seems to me that it presents a tremendous problem in the arts, and not just in literature, but more conspicuously, for example, in music. I know you know a lot about modern music, but there was a point, wasn't there? Well, I shouldn't say it wasn't there because maybe I'm wrong, but somewhere about the time of Schoenberg, yes, where music took off to a level where you had to have a certain expertise to follow it. In other words, it parted company with the popular audience. Do you think that serious writing has done that?
No, I don't. I think it's all, and I wouldn't completely buy the line that modernism is where the writer parted company, the serious writer parted company with his audience. I mean, if you think back to Stendhal, his famous dedication was to the happy few. Stendhal is a very, seems to us, an extremely approachable, intelligent, but very orderly and well laid out and flowing and natural sort of writer. But when he wrote, he thought he'd only have 30 readers, 60 readers, or so on. Poets, if you think about poets, most poets, for most of the time, have always, have never been in touch with any sort of broad audience.
Well,
I think with music and painting, it does sometimes take a while to catch up. But I think the great breakthrough of modernism, which was sort of absolutely necessary in all the arts, we have at least, it's been nearly 100 years, I mean, we have at least sort of caught up with all that. And I think it varies according to the arts. I mean, I think in painting, for example, the audience is much more quickly onto what's happening, whether it's good, whether it's bad, and understands the language more immediately than perhaps some music. But, you know, there are composers now having, in their 20s, having world premieres at the proms and so on, and the seats aren't empty those nights.
No, when I think of a modern composer who lost touch, it seems to me that it was deliberate. Someone like John Cage or so on.
Yes, I mean, I think in all the arts, there's always someone who pushes it so far that it breaks. I mean, we can think of in literature, in the novel specifically, there are two ways for it to go wrong. Either you become so obsessed by the language that you lose sight of everything else, Viz. Finnegan's Wake, or you become so obsessed by the theory of the novel that all humanity and real life is drained out of it, viz. The nouveau roman.
Yeah.
And in a way, there's less danger if you're a novelist, because you're always being sort of grounded in the human factor, which is what the novel is always about.
Which is
it's
what
harder to go off into theory.
It's what the French new novel, the Nouveau Roman, actually tried to get rid of.
Yes, sure.
It said that was a trap.
Yes, yes.
It's not going to be held back by this real life stuff.
Yeah, and there are people called Chausistes who said that things were just as interesting as human beings, so we can write novels about things. Bad idea.
It's not quite the same as Morandi doing paintings about bottles.
Not at all. No.
Let me ask you about, it seems to me that you do an unusually good job of avoiding the temptations that beset the novelist. And one of the temptations, of course, is the temptation to pick up quite a lot of small change in another area, like, for example, Hollywood. Have you ever thought that your life would be different or easier if you operated in that area as well?
Well, I started as a journalist, and I still do journalism, and I quite like that. It's a mixture of, it takes me a long time to write a novel, and I sort of still think I'm learning how to write a novel. You never think, I think I might be tempted by some other mode, be it, you know, theatre or screenplays or something like that, if I thought I'd completely cracked the novel, but I don't, and perhaps I never will.
Well, Hollywood, I'm sure, would be ready to pay you a lot of money while you sat there figuring it out. That's the temptation. You don't necessarily have to finish it all.
Yes. I don't know. I think it's... well, let's take them in order. I mean, I think the theatre is probably a greater danger and trap and false route for a novelist than screenplays are.
I think a lot of people don't realise that the theatre is where the real money is made. The playwrights do very, very well. It's a terrific temptation to get into.
It's a terrific temptation, and novelists like Flaubert and Henry James have famously failed disastrously at it. And novelists think that they can do it because novelists enjoy writing dialogue. Yeah. What they don't realise is that stage dialogue is completely different from novelistic dialogue, and that the theatre seems to be realistic, but it's certainly not naturalistic in any sort of way. and that language is used quite differently.
So what did Flaubert do wrong?
He thought it was too easy. He wrote an awful lot of letters about getting his stuff on and getting his friend Louis Bouillet's stuff on after Bouillet had died. And he doesn't respect it enough. He thinks that having seen a few plays, it's a trick that he can work. He was brought up short on the second night of one of his plays when the leading actor came off with tears in his eyes at halfway because he knew it wasn't working. And that was when you got all your chums along and you had a clack and everyone cheered regardless, but this guy knew that the play wasn't working. Yeah. There aren't many examples of writers who are successful and good as both dramatists and novelists. I mean, Chekhov, though that's short stories and the drama. Michael Frayn, perhaps, I don't know.
I'd say Frayn, definitely. I think of one example, it's Stoppard, but Stoppard wrote one novel, Lord Malquist and Mr. Moon,
that's right,
and then went straight into the theatre.
Yes. The other example is Turgenev. He wrote several plays, of which Month in the Country is a great play. But they were complete flops at the time, and they weren't performed for years later. And then he wrote wonderful novels.
When you talk about Flaubert's play and the actor with tears in his eyes, it does remind me, with due allowance for scale, of what happened to my screenplay. I wrote a screenplay for Hollywood, and with exactly the same attitude. This is easy. I won't bother to study too many examples, because after all, I've been seeing movies all my life. How hard could it be? And learned the hard way that there's a lot to it. For example, structure is everything and dialogue scarcely matters. And it's very easy to underestimate another form, indeed. And it might come with the territory. It might come with the central boldness of mastering one form that you don't realize how intricate other forms are.
But I mean, I think it's also the sort of hazard of how your talent is allotted to you. I mean, it's Faulkner obviously was a very good screenwriter. Aldous Huxley, to one's surprise, did a very, very good Hollywood adaptation of Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, it's excellent. Yeah,
it's very good, isn't it?
Faulkner had a system. He would spend 6 months on the plantation writing the latest semi-saleable masterpiece. Some of them impenetrable, in my view, but undoubtedly full of plenty of integrity. And he would spend 6 months with no integrity at all in Hollywood each year, well fueled with alcohol, just working to orders. And he balanced it up. But it's they're two very separate lives.
Yes, I don't think it was lacking integrity. I mean, so the Chandler script, whichever it is, that he wrote, the famous Chandler
Big Sleep,
is
an excellent script.
It's an excellent script, yeah.
But he regarded himself as for sale in Hollywood. In fact, it's probably the best attitude, because that's probably the best way to do good work, is to realize that the movie itself is the hero.
Yeah,
and you can shape it only up to a certain point, and then the actors and the director take over.
Yes, but I think also it is also a question of temperament, and I don't think I have a collaborator's temperament, and I know what I want to do, and I know how it wants to be at the end, and then at that point people can like it or not like it. But the idea of, if I was writing a novel, and my publisher said, well, yeah, but first of all, we have to show it to the director and then the lighting cameraman and then blah, blah, blah. I think it would actually...
and then Dustin Hoffman would want to change it and bring his own writer in.
That's right, yes, more nude scenes or something like that. Yeah.
Or fewer. Or Barbara Streisand would want her writers to take over, which is part of stardom. I mean, the movie with the star power, that's what happens, inevitably. I think probably the main reason you're not tempted down that road is what you've said, is that your talents lie in another direction. But your talents do lie tremendously in the direction of journalism, along with the novel, because journalism is something you take seriously, and I think you were, as a literary editor, you were exemplary. But I often wondered how you dealt with other people's writing, when other people's writing comes in across your desk.
What, when I was a literary editor?
Yes.
Well, I hope with sort of incredible tact and benevolence.
In my experience, yes. But always? But I thought that was because I was so terrific. What about the ones who were not so terrific? Was there...
I think, I mean, as far as I could see, and I sort of studied under two very good literary editors, Claire Tomlin and Martin Amis, and I also worked with some great literary editors, Terry Kilmartin,
the best,
Carl Miller, Ian Hamilton, and so on. Often it's part of the art of being a good literary editor is simple human response to the fact that your review has arrived. Yes, I've read it. Yes, we're almost certainly going to run it. And at that point, you're hugely in credit with the person. There are literary editors out there now who you can send stuff into, and you only know they've got it because you see it in the paper a week later. And that's not the art of being a literary editor. They're the literary editors who think that that somehow sort of stony silence and unimpressibility is a sign of integrity. Not true, I'm afraid. So first of all, just let them know that you know that they exist and that your piece is readable, that their piece is readable, and so on. And then you just have to, as in any other human relationship, adjust to the person that you're dealing with, and that there are some people who you knew would never take a suggestion on board, and there are others, often the fiercest ones, like, for example, your compatriots, the critic Peter Conrad, who is one of the most ferocious critics of all time. We used to refer to him on the paper as the Tasmanian devil, and we would sort of pretend that we kept him in a cage, and we'd sort of occasionally lob a book into his cage, and he'd go, he's a wonderful writer, and incredibly knows an incredible amount of stuff, partly because he's very clever, partly because he doesn't sleep, I think. A nocturnal Tasmanian devil, if such things exist.
He was very kind to me recently in a review, but I can remember the days when he could be very, very tough. Yeah.
But the first time I rang him up, I thought, this guy, it was an opera review, and I still know very little about opera, and I sort of tentatively suggested that perhaps this line seemed to contradict the previous line, and he said, oh yeah, it's completely wrong, cut it. And so you never know until you're dealing with someone how they're going to react to this sort of gentle, you hope, suggestion.
Well, I'm just examining my own reactions. I think I'll fight fiercely for anything I think is good, but I really let go on anything that, when it's pointed out to me, it doesn't make sense or would benefit from being shortened or something. What I can't deal with is the fact checkers and the house style. I mean, you write for the New Yorker.
Yes.
I want to get on this. This is all practically a separate subject, but I'm not going to make my complaints. Is how a writer of your care and fastidiousness copes with this great editorial staff that comes roaring down the telephone.
Again, it depends on which editor you get, and I was certainly lucky when I started by having Charles McGrath, who was an absolutely wonderful editor, working on my stuff. You're right that the fact checkers spend almost as much of your time as you've spent writing the piece, checking every single fact, and often it seems to go to sort of absurd lengths, but they equally, save your ass on many occasions.
At least one occasion they saved my ass from total humiliation.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
But they are. I think I'm on their side because they are a sort of wonderful breed. They're all sort of straight out of college, and they're very clever, and they're incredibly polite, and that's what does it. You couldn't provoke a fact checker to a word of irritation or anger if you tried your hardest.
I can take all that. The bit I can't take is when the way I've balanced a sentence or written it is altered and has its rhythm wrecked because of assumption on the part of the house that things should be written in a certain way.
Yes,
that's house style.
There is, there can be a tyranny of grammar. Yeah. I mean, I freely admit that I don't know the difference between that and which, and that I put, if I've got two whiches, I put a that next time round.
So do I. Yeah.
And I think that actually that's a sort of difference which is now meaningless.
Yeah.
But they often sort of change those around. I think
they would say that's the difference that is now meaningless because
yes,
because there might be another difference that is. You see,
yeah.
It's been explained to me. I understood the explanation.
I always understand,
and then I forgot it.
I always understand it when it's made to me, and I always forget it exactly the same. But I think worse than that is when they, as you say, when you feel the flow of your sentence, but they repeat the preposition. Yeah. You have a preposition governing two nouns, and they think it would be better if they repeated the preposition, that sort of thing. And it depends on your editor. You can sometimes get that stuff taken out.
But it's all based on the idea that a magazine can write, and a magazine can't write. Only writers can write. So I think house style is
that's true. But you are talking about a very great magazine, which is even in a slightly doctored form, printed many fine, famous pieces.
Yeah, and I'm very glad to be in it.
And also, if you compare American magazine editing with British magazine editing, it may be at times infuriating, but it does exist.
Yes. Well, the virtue of British magazine editing is that all your errors stay in. And the idea is that the letter column next week, the infuriated readers will write in and fix it for you that way.
Yes, I think, yes. That's making a virtue of laziness, I think. I mean, the Americans have fact checkers. What the Brits have is, if someone has once said this before in another newspaper, it must be true, which is altogether a different thing.
When you look at your shelf of works, which increases...
slowly, yes.
No, to those of us looking
double
on,
figures now, I think.
To those of us looking on, with it increases with dizzy speed. Every writer thinks every other writer is working harder than he is.
Yeah.
And is it balancing up? Is it the way you think it should be, or is it on the way towards somewhere? I mean, you can think of a lot of writers who actually spent their lives preparing, and there was something big on the horizon. If you've got an à la recherche du temps perdu or something like that in your mind that you haven't done yet?
No, because I probably wouldn't recognize it as such, or if I thought of it in terms of I must do my à la recherche now, it would
be a plan.
That would be a plan, and also that would be a sort of act of literary castration to sort of try and base something on something like that, or rivalize something like that. I generally do go from book to book. I sometimes have the book after the one I'm writing next in mind, but I have no, the word that I'm very glad that you didn't use was oeuvre. I have no oeuvre, and I plan not to have an oeuvre. I write one book after another, and if other people want to look at them as a mass, that's fine by me, but it doesn't help me to do so. I don't look back, and I don't think, I'm heading towards that mountain peak.
Julian Barnes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Clive.